Well, when we talk about Catholicism in Quebec and the role it's played in politics and society, it's important to remember that we cannot reduce Catholicism in Quebec to just one school, one vein, one line of thought. Lionel Groulx, Louis Adolphe Paquette certainly represented that conservative combination of religion and nationalism, appealing to Roman Catholicism as the foundation of the nation, and in the vein of much of Lionel Groulx's historiography, as indicated in Le Canada Français Missionnaire, or in his 4-volume Histoire du Canada Français, we must remember that he's presenting his edited version of history. So he constantly refers to the religious orders that played, it is true, a key role in New France, such as the Jesuits or the Sulpicians, or the other the orders of religious nuns who worked, les hospitalières, the hospitaller nuns that established l'Hôtel Dieu here in Montreal, and the role that the laywoman Jeanne Mance played with that religious order. So to perceive the history of New France, of French Canada, and of Quebec through a religious lens, through a Roman Catholic lens, through an ecclesiastical lens, by no means does justice to the full spectrum, the entire panoply of history in New France, in Quebec, in French Canada. Yet we must also keep in mind that within Roman Catholic history in New France, in French Canada, and in Quebec, we have to remember there was an entire, particularly at the end of the 19th century, Rerum Novarum, the encyclical promulgated by Leo XIII, essentially serves as the constitution of social Catholicism. And social Catholicism played also a pivotal role in the history of French Canada and of Quebec. One can think, for example, of the Dominican scholar, such an innovator, Georges-Henri Lévesque, and others, that school of l'action catholique, l'action sociale, who endeavored to make drawing on Roman Catholicism and Rerum Novarum and an entire vein of social thought and social action. And here we have quite a marked difference from people like Louis Adolphe Paquette and Lionel Groulx. What is in effect happens is through the school of social Catholicism, on one hand, we have that vein of Georges-Henri Lévesque seeking to answer the social needs and requirements and concerns of French Canada, subsequently Quebec, in health, in education, and in welfare. But on the other hand, Lionel Groulx in social Catholicism takes it in a decidedly nationalist vein, and he believes that the way to meet the needs of French Canada and of Quebec is to respond to it as a nation. And this leads to a separation in the ways of Catholicism. And we have to do justice to the richness of Roman Catholic history in French Canada and in Quebec, as we have the social Catholic vein with Georges-Henri Lévesque and others in social Catholicism, and we have the nationalist vein such as that of Lionel Groulx. I think we must remember that Lionel Groulx, for a decade, served as the editor-in-chief of l'Action nationale, a major publication in the 1920s in French Canada, in Quebec. And he's, through his editing and through his own articles and the editorial board and his contributors, he took Roman Catholicism in French Canada, in Quebec, in a very nationalist vein. And this serves as the precursor of another review that continues to this day, that's called L'Action Nationale. We also want to keep in mind that for somebody, particularly for Lionel Groulx, he did not think in terms of Quebec alone, but rather he thought in terms of French Canada, and indeed of French North America. It's no coincidence, therefore, that Lionel Groulx established a remarkable scholarly journal called La Revue d'Histoire de l'Amérique Française. To this day, it is one of the best published in North America, and indeed in the Western Hemisphere, in the French language. He also founded the Institute, l'Institut d'Histoire de l'Amérique Française. He never saw French language, French culture, and the French presence in North America as ending at the borders of Quebec. And as editor-in-chief of L'Action Nationale during the 1920s, he again and again reached out to Francophones in Ontario, Francophones in Manitoba, because Saint Boniface, essentially the twin city of Winnipeg, with so many Francophones and Roman Catholic clerics. He also reached out to Francophones in Saskatchewan, and he himself would go in person to these various locations, as well as to Francophones in the southern Ontario area, and believe it or not, he regularly went to Franco-Americans in New England. Why did he do this? Because he realized, or perceived as a cleric, as a priest, and he always signed his name, Lionel Groulx, priest. He considered Francophones in North America to constitute a spiritual community, a spiritual communion, that their faith held them together in spiritual bonds. Why did he do this? Because for him, the model of French Canadians is not that so much of the political nation state as that of the church as collective consciousness, the church as community, a spiritual community that has no geopolitical boundaries, but rather in a mystical union binds all Francophones, all French North Americans, and all French Canadians together. I moved away again.
It's okay. What I'll do